The sky above us is becoming a crowded place. On the very fringes of our atmosphere, satellites are helping us to communicate, find our way around, making our modern, busy lives possible. They are also watching us, allowing nations to spy on nations and providing the communications that are necessary for modern warfare. At the time of making this video, there are about 12,000 satellites in Earth's orbit around our planet. More than 7,000 of these are part of the Starlink mega constellation, a mission by Elon Musk's SpaceX program to surround Earth with an interconnected web of satellites. And this is merely the beginning. The Starlink fleet is set to grow, with thousands more satellites to be launched, perhaps as many as 42,000. These units aim to bring internet connection to the furthest regions of the globe, from the most barren Arctic tundra to towering mountain peaks, persisting in all weathers and when all other communication systems fail. But Starlink is not the only satellite venture from SpaceX. Less known is their military project, codenamed Starshield, which aims to build a satellite constellation with the support of a $1.8 billion contract with the US Department of Defense. Despite the glossy and marketable name, Starshield is shrouded in secrecy. It's designed for government use to support national security, but how? And at what cost? I'm Alex McColgan and you're watching Astrum. Join me in our skies today as we attempt to decode the corporate speak of the SpaceX Starshield operation and what it means for our security, privacy, and everyday lives. We'll explore what Starshield actually is and how it links to SpaceX's more commercial satellite project, the Starlink mega constellation. As satellite populations continue to boom, we'll explore the background, that is, our new age space race, how the players have changed, and who is really in charge of this final frontier. Before we march into the atmospheric battlefield, let's take a closer look at a more family-friendly SpaceX satellite project, Starlink. First announced in 2015, Starlink was designed for the purpose of rebuilding the internet in space and aimed to place 4,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is standard for most satellites, even the International Space Station, and can be anywhere between 160 and 2,000 kilometers above Earth's surface. The goal of this system is connectivity where you least expect it. You need only plug the system in and point it at the sky with their antenna to get online. Besides digital gameplay in the mountains or taking a work call on the beach, the idea of worldwide internet connection actually has the potential for some really positive social change. Schools in remote areas of Fiji and the Solomon Islands have employed the use of Starlink to access digital teaching resources, which is making education more accessible for all. The Starlink fleet can be used to aid communications in the event of natural disasters, as it's less vulnerable than standard undersea cables. This came to light in 2024, when a 7.3 magnitude earthquake in Vanuatu took out the country's only undersea cable. Starlink was quickly able to deploy 300 satellites, which restored connection for emergency services and aided the national recovery operation. These success stories have contributed to Starlink's popularity surge, and the service now has over 5.4 million subscribers across the globe, with an estimated revenue exceeding $3.2 billion US. These are all great selling points, but what about the satellites themselves? How do they actually work? Well, the latest Starlink satellites are not small. They are 30 meters long and weigh as much as a small car, orbiting merely 550 kilometers above the Earth's surface. They are launched in a stack, as many as 60 at a time on SpaceX's own Falcon 9 vehicles, reusable two-stage rockets that have already completed nearly 500 missions. When deployed, the satellites use navigation sensors to survey the stars and position themselves incredibly accurately. Each unit contains 3 space lasers, which help it communicate with other units to form a global internet mesh. They each also have 8 antennas to connect with receivers on the Earth's surface, and they can adjust their position with ion propulsion systems that use argon for precise maneuverability. As I mentioned before, there are now over 7,000 Starlink satellites currently in orbit, and this number is expected to grow. As you can see from this availability map, the fleet already covers much of the Western Hemisphere, encompassing around 2.7 billion people. But SpaceX wants more, and several other countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and even Antarctica are likely to be connected in the near future. It's quite the satellite empire. There may not be loads of information about Starlink, but there's far less about Starshield, SpaceX's other venture into the world of satellites. It can be said that Starshield is like Starlink's darker, military cousin, and there are plenty of reasons why. Like Starlink, it's composed of low Earth orbiting satellites, but this time they serve the sole purpose of defense and are wholly owned and controlled by the US government, following the $1.8 billion contribution to the project by the National Reconnaissance Office in 2021. They have enhanced encryption and other security features for secure data processing and employ a modular design. This means that the satellites can integrate a wide variety of payloads, be it for communication, Earth observation, target tracking, early missile warning, and so on. Governments can mix and match, designing a Starshield satellite that best fits their specific requirements and defense objectives. The exact details of how Starshield has been used are pretty vague, but there's no doubt that it is in use. The US Marines have pounced on the new tech, implementing units across its 2nd Marine Division for both basic communications and more specialized tasks like targeting and fires. On their website, Major Tim Wren from the 2nd Division praised the satellites for their ability to maintain services during a service-level training event, despite poor weather conditions and power outages, which knocked out other satellite transmissions. Likewise, in 2023, SpaceX won a 1-year contract with the United States Space Force worth $70 million, and there has been recent speculation that Space Force may continue to use SpaceX satellites rather than front the cost of building their own. The project is rapidly gaining attention from clients of the highest office and shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon. But how similar is Starshield to Starlink? An important point to mention is that both Starlink and Starshield can use the same inter-satellite laser communication terminals, which use laser beams to form high-speed data links between satellites, instead of traditional radio signals. SpaceX boasts the only communications laser operating at scale in orbit today, which basically means there is much less chance of other satellites, privately owned or otherwise, interfering with Starshield's data. This would obviously be appealing from a defense perspective, and clients can be fairly confident that it works, since SpaceX has been using this technology at scale for as long as Starlink has been running. In many ways, Starlink is like the portfolio SpaceX has brought along to its interviews for Starshield, and this has proven to be a pretty effective sales technique. It's clear from the marketing of both products that Starlink is meant to be a public consumer service, while Starshield is used for national defense. But with such similar technology, is there ever any crossover? Indeed, the line between Starlink and Starshield is blurred when you consider recent and ongoing conflicts across the globe. This year, Musk has taken to X, formerly Twitter, to state that his Starlink system is the backbone of the Ukrainian army, and that their entire front line would collapse if he turned the system off. And he has even done so momentarily on occasions. Starlink is used by the Ukrainian military for internet connection in remote war zones, and the Polish Digitization Ministry pays an estimated $50 million a year for the privilege. So Starlink is being used for defense purposes and could easily be on par with Starshield as a military asset. It may only be providing internet connection, but it's what can be done with the internet that turns it into a weapon. And to simply turn it off would change the tide on this conflict within a matter of hours. That's an awful lot of responsibility for whoever's running these satellites, perhaps more than anyone could have envisioned when Starlink was first proposed. In a different conflict nearly 2,000 kilometers away, Starlink was allowed to start operating in a single hospital in Gaza last year as an exception to the internet blackout Israel had imposed across the region following months of negotiations. This has enabled vital communications between humanitarian aid workers in this region, though Israel is still reluctant to allow more coverage for fear that it could be used against them in the war. These are all sensitive and politically charged issues, and some fear that SpaceX's involvement will make them all the more difficult to resolve. Essentially, this technology has given private companies like SpaceX a seat at the table for military debates that they would never have been privy to without it. For those involved in conflict, having to depend on a private company rather than a humanitarian NGO or an elected government official for services that could determine their fate in that conflict is risky. And yet, it's often an inevitable choice in the landscape of modern warfare. Without this technology, they face the likelihood that it will be used against them with disastrous consequences. Perhaps Starshield is SpaceX's way of disentangling Starlink from military uses, but this separation won't happen overnight, especially whilst these conflicts continue. And even if peace is won, there are logistical issues to sort out with both projects. As I mentioned, Starlink and Starshield use the same communication terminals and laser beam data links, which could make it harder for them to function independently of one another. But as long as they remain linked, we can expect things to get messy, especially if the same satellites can be seen as both a valid military target and a vital service for citizens. But putting conflict aside, are there other consequences of our increasing use of satellites? How could they impact our skies and our dreams of exploring them in the future? Countries who want to avoid subscribing to Starlink are left with little choice but to launch their own satellite constellation, a task involving a lot of costly rocket launches. They'll have to keep a careful eye on their budget, but maybe a rocket can help with that too. Rocket Money, the sponsor of today's video, is a personal finance app that allows you to manage subscriptions, lower bills, make a custom budget, and grow your savings all in one place. Before trying it, I'd been using spreadsheets, but I love how easy it became to manage my finance. Rocket Money helped me see trends in my finance, and with just a few taps, I could cancel unwanted subscriptions. No wonder Rocket Money's premium features helped customers save up to $740 a year. If you are looking for an effective way to track your money, scan my QR code or follow my link in the description below to get started for free. But Starlink isn't just a problem due to its cost, its ethics, or its insecurity. In addition to questions about how these satellites will play into current and future conflicts, there are concerns about how much this hardware is now filling up the sky. Astronomers already complain about the amount of light pollution that is reflected by so many satellites, and the emissions that leak from Starlink satellites can blind radio telescopes on Earth. A study published 2 years ago in Astronomy and Astrophysics investigated these emissions and found that the radiation leaks exceed regulations set by the International Telecommunications Union, and that the interference from the second generation of Starlink satellites was 32 times stronger than the first generation. Since this study was published, many more such satellites have been deployed, and SpaceX has not yet finished building its mega constellations. China is also entering this space race with their Guowang low Earth orbit communication satellites in a project that looks remarkably similar to Starlink. They plan to send up a further 13,000 units, which will add to this growing congestion. It's not just a problem for astronomers, it is already a problem for the operators of the satellites themselves. Earlier, I mentioned that Starlink satellites are able to adjust their positions using their ion propulsion systems. Well, there is a very good reason for them being able to do that. In the year ending November 2024, the Starlink constellation made 100,050 adjustments to avoid collisions with debris and other objects. That is one movement every 5 minutes. Estimates vary, but there are plans for perhaps 4 or 5 times as many satellites in low Earth orbit than are up there at present. In addition to SpaceX and the Chinese government, companies such as Amazon and OneWeb have plans for their own mega constellations. Not only will all these units have to avoid each other, but getting them up into orbit will add to the amount of unwanted and unplanned objects that they will have to avoid, namely what you call space junk. Every launch generates debris, a type of space pollution, from parts of launch vehicles to entire rocket bodies. As far back as 1978, NASA scientist Don Kessler predicted that within 30 or 40 years, there would be so much debris in low Earth orbit that collisions would become inevitable. His predictions have so far come true. We know of more than 25,000 objects larger than 10 centimeters up there, such as from fragments of destroyed equipment or even entire derelict spacecraft and launch vehicles. These are the easier objects to detect and avoid. There are also estimated to be over 1 million smaller fragments from 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters littering the outer reaches of our atmosphere. This doesn't sound like much of a problem until you consider that these miniature missiles move at speeds of more than 25,000 kilometers per hour. If you remember the principles of physics from school, you will know that the energy given off in any collision is a function of mass and velocity. A bullet dropped into your hand, for instance, feels like nothing at all. Fire the same bullet from a rifle and it can punch a hole through a steel sheet. These pieces of debris are traveling at more than 5 times the speed of a bullet fired from a rifle. As more objects crowd into low Earth orbit, some people believe it inevitable that one of these collisions will result in damage that sends even more debris traveling at incredibly high speeds into the path of other satellites, resulting in more and more collisions and more debris. This chain reaction is what we call Kessler syndrome, and you can learn more about it on Astrum in our video dedicated to this topic. If Kessler syndrome does become a reality, it could wipe out every communication satellite and piece of hardware currently in low Earth orbit above us, including, for example, the International Space Station and the Hubble telescope. It would leave such a vast amount of shrapnel forming a layer around our planet that it would be almost impossible to launch anything into space anymore. We would face the danger of becoming prisoners on our planet, trapped by a dangerous layer of our own rubbish that could take years, decades, or even centuries to clear away. Now, that is quite the doomsday scenario, and definitely not one for the claustrophobic. But is the situation really that serious? As the combined Starlink and Starshield network continues to grow, will it inevitably bring about its own destruction? Well, as long as the satellite population continues to expand, the probability of collision will increase. This probability is how Starlink satellites decide whether or not to adjust their positions in the sky, as they are programmed with a specific limit for the odds of collision and move as soon as that limit is passed. So it's not that they know that a collision is imminent, they just move as a precaution to be on the safe side. The odds of collision that is widely accepted by NASA and others is 1 in 10,000. But in 2024, SpaceX quietly changed Starlink's limit to 1 in 1 million. That seems extra cautious, 100 times more cautious to be exact. So SpaceX must have a reason to be playing it so safe. With a change like this, Starlink satellites have to undertake movements to adjust not every 5 minutes, but every 30 seconds or so. With so much extra movement from so many different companies' satellites, it becomes incredibly difficult for anybody to keep track of where all these satellites are supposed to be, and a serious collision does actually become much more likely. Satellites won't just be adjusting as a precaution, they'll have to do so, or face destruction. A collision between satellites themselves could potentially kickstart Kessler syndrome, But that's not the only way it could happen. Instead, the collision could come, not from another satellite, but from a weapon designed to target it. Welcome to the world of counterspace. We haven't mentioned Russia yet, which may seem surprising because they sent the very first functioning satellite into space, called Sputnik 1, in 1957. But despite this early advantage, Russia does not really have much stake in the satellite space race. Back in 2023, they had a total of 220 satellites in orbit, which was only about 2.5% of the global satellite population at the time. This is due to a lack of manufacturing power in Russia for satellites. In fact, they are only capable of building about 40 per year, which is dwarfed by the output from companies like SpaceX. So perhaps it was this struggle to make a satellite mega-constellation that prompted Russia to look into other ways of exerting power on the world stage. In February 2024, the White House confirmed it had evidence to suggest that Russia was developing an anti-satellite nuclear weapon. It's important to note that no nuclear weapons like this have actually been deployed yet, and the public details of Russia's progress have been vague. But Russia did veto a suggestion to reaffirm the now 58-year-old prohibition on putting nuclear weapons in space, originally made by the Outer Space Treaty. And even if nuclear anti-sat weapons are still a way off, Russia is also developing non-nuclear weapons, such as lasers, ground-launched missiles, and electronic warfare systems to target satellites. On the 15th of November 2021, Russia tested a direct ascent anti-satellite missile called A235 Noodle, which successfully destroyed Cosmos 1408, one of their own obsolete satellites. This littered low Earth orbit with the resulting debris and set off alarm bells at the Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado, USA. Resulting from the test, more than 1,500 trackable pieces of debris were identified, with the potential to generate hundreds of thousands more smaller pieces as they continue their orbital path around the planet. This has been condemned by the US Army as a deliberate disregard for the security, safety, stability, and long-term sustainability of the space domain for all nations. The fallout from this single test will pose a threat to activities in outer space for years to come, and will make collision avoidance even trickier for satellites trying to maintain mega-constellations like Starlink and Starshield. So Kessler was not shooting for the moon with his theory, and as we've seen, there are plenty of ways for it to come true. Whether it's a collision between satellites that got their calculations wrong, or an intentional attack from a hostile nation, the resulting debris could be enough to kickstart a chain reaction of destruction, and things won't be looking good for our future missions to explore space. There is another aspect of this story that we haven't considered yet. If this proliferation of orbiting electronics does manage to continue without triggering its own destruction, either accidental or deliberate, what happens to all this equipment when it reaches the end of its life? Right now, for the military Starshield hardware to function, it needs the Starlink network across the globe. These satellites have a life of 4 to 5 years. And as we've seen, they cannot simply be left to add to the congestion and become more space junk when they are no longer of use. As the old saying goes, what comes up must come down. SpaceX states on its website that its satellites are demisable, meaning that they fully break up and burn up during atmospheric re-entry. And if any fragments were to escape this fate, SpaceX assures that they would have negligible impact energy. This is somewhat reassuring, but SpaceX can't possibly promise 100% demisability for all of its satellites across every situation for as long as Starlink and Starshield continue, nor can any satellite operator for that matter. And sadly, after conducting some research into this, some scientists have noted that this impact energy may not be as negligible as we thought. This year, an article was published in Nature revealing that many companies do not have clear plans for removing old satellites from orbit, and that it can be very difficult to predict where they will land. The article detailed 2 events in the past couple of years, where large pieces of space junk had landed in Kenya and Uganda at the speed of a small missile, which scattered wreckage up to 40 kilometers without warning. With more uncontrolled satellite re-entries like this, any location on Earth could be in a firing line, and even commercial airplanes are put at risk. What's more, many operators leave their space junk to decay naturally wherever it does land, which is a near impossible task for materials built to withstand the extremes of spaceflight. This proves that there is at least some risk from satellite re-entry, both for people and the environment, and that affected areas are often given little to no warning when things do go wrong. And even if the satellites do burn up during re-entry as they're supposed to, this can cause damage of its own. The part of our planet's atmosphere where this burning takes place is home to the notoriously fragile ozone layer. When these satellites, which are largely made of aluminium, burn up in the atmosphere, they produce nanoparticles of aluminium oxides, which are known to accelerate ozone depletion. A study published in 2024 sought to investigate this impact and found that the demise of a typical 250 kilogram satellite can generate around 30 kilograms of aluminium oxide nanoparticles. And bear in mind, the V2 Starlink satellites weigh around 800 kilograms. Once produced, these nanoparticles can remain in the atmosphere for decades, leading to a significant risk of ozone depletion. So even the safe demise of these satellites can have some major environmental impacts. We've made some huge efforts towards protecting our ozone layer, following the ban on chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, back in 1979. It would be a shame to see that effort go to waste because of some improper satellite disposal. All in all, it's clear that there are some major concerns arising from our modern-day satellite use. These issues go beyond just Starlink and Starshield, but as a key player in this new space race, SpaceX will have a big role to play in deciding how to tackle them. Given the risks, we need decisive action so that space can remain a viable domain for us to explore, whilst hopefully maintaining the benefits that satellites can provide. When we began research for this video, we merely thought it would be interesting to find out more about the Starshield project. Military innovation in science and technology has helped to create many of the things we take for granted in our daily lives, from microwave ovens to duct tape, and we are interested in all things space. Details on the inner workings of Starshield and Starlink have been hard to come by, which is understandable since these satellites are currently playing an active role in several major conflicts around the globe. But it's no less important for us to know how this technology is being used and how it can play into our futures. Satellite production has become its own space race for the 21st century, and for a whole host of players are trying to get a piece of the pie. The benefits can be huge for the economy, education, disaster recovery, social equality, and more. But given the growing influence of those wielding the control, it's worth carefully considering how their role will change as the line between corporate leadership and political influence continues to blur. Politics aside, satellites are shaping our planet's orbital zone, which itself is a finite resource. In our planet's low orbital zone, space is indeed limited, and without careful planning, we may reach a point where satellites are the only thing we ever launch into orbit again. My goal with Astrum has always been to make space accessible to everyone with these videos, sharing the wonders of our universe and beyond. I'm just hoping that, with these warnings in mind, SpaceX and other satellite operators will be able to achieve their goals, whilst ensuring that the skies remain accessible for the generations to come. After all, What is space without room for our ambition to explore and understand it? So, thank you for watching and see you next time. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our crew of astronauts over at Patreon who help us make science knowledge freely available to everyone. Chasing the algorithm can be hit and miss sometimes, so your contributions help us keep making the content we love. And if you want to join the Patreon, there's never been a better time to get in on the party. Just sign up with the link in the description. When you join, you'll be able to watch the whole video ad-free, see your name in the credits, and submit questions to our team. Meanwhile, click the link to this playlist for more Astrum content. I'll see you next time.